Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. You know, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that we have to discuss right now as we get into today's program is exactly what is happening with respect to the gutless opposition party, or GOP. There has been this undeniable push to once again basically fail to deliver on the great multitude of promises that they've made over the course of the past 4 successive election cycles. This is just one of those self-evident truths that it has become impossible to ignore. Nevertheless, what we see coming to the limelight here, coming to fruition, is an inescapable and, dare I say, self-evident truth, where the gutless opposition party is once again thumbing its nose at the base of the party, its true core constituency. This is just one of those things that almost to the point of it reaching ad nauseum. And once again, it is fully indicative of the reason why so many within the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours have become disenfranchised with and alienated from the modern system of American polity. And the unfortunate aspect of it is that the Republican Party at one time stood for being the party of fiscal responsibility, the party of limited government influence and control, the party that wanted to follow strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the 4 corners of our shared United States Constitution at all levels of government, as is called for in the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our Constitution itself. You see, there is this laughably ridiculous notion that so many within the land of the free and the home of the brave have come to believe, and that is that healthcare is a guaranteed, constitutionally protected right. However, ladies and gentlemen, as we have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, nothing, and I truly mean nothing, could be further from the truth. Our constitutionally protected rights have been reduced to writing and are codified in the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. And pursuant to Article 5 of that said Constitution, they are to be treated as though they were part of the Constitution at the time of its original drafting and ultimately its ratification. This is something that far too few people realize. It's something that far too few people have been giving any type of credibility to or any type of attention to. And that's particularly true with the so-called right-wing punditry and commensurate. Now, I do have to come out and applaud Mark Levin for taking a stance against this debacle of attempting to cram down this so-called American Health Care Act down the throats of the American people completely against their will and without their input. But you see, the fight that has been going on ever since the 45th president of these United States of America, Donald J. Trump, assumed the highest office in the land is one in which we are hampering ourselves, where we are curtailing our own efforts to overcome that disastrous debacle and fiasco officially known as the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or as it is known in the common American vernacular, Obamacare. The problem is that what has been submitted to the American people, and it's not a problem so much as it is an issue. The issue, rather, is that what the Republican Party is attempting to foist on their core constituency as a replacement of Obamacare and a repeal and replace effort of Obamacare doesn't do any of that. It fails to deliver on the great litany of promises that the Republican Party has made over the course of damn near a decade now. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, I don't see it improving within the foreseeable future. I believe that the Republican Party continues to double down on its efforts to bamboozle its base, to try and convince us that they now somehow magically have discovered a way to tell us they're doing something and go forth and do the exact and polar opposite. Of course, this is something that we have seen come from the rank and file of the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP, for decades now, and for generations now. They think they have us trapped. And they have essentially become the Me Too party of socialism, where they are embracing the same nonsense as the frothing at the mouth, Fabian socialist, leftist-controlled Democrat Party, and they think that they can do it, maybe just at a slower pace of pushing this nation ever further to the left, without any regard to the detrimental and deleterious impact and consequences, as well as ramifications, that this is going to have upon the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people of these United States of America. Folks, we cannot ignore this. We cannot deny that this is a self-evident truth and an undeniable repetitive pattern that has come to the surface and to the forefront in generation after successive generation, and it is not getting any better. You see, what's happening now is that there are a handful of senators, some of whom are, opposing the so-called American Health Care Act, for idiotic reasons. I'm speaking of people like Dean Heller of Nevada and of Olympia Snow of Maine. But then there are the core conservatives who are opposing it for the right reasons. People like Texas Senator Ted Cruz, people like Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, people like Utah Senator Mike Lee. And why are these notable statesmen standing in staunch opposition to this bag of garbage that is being foisted on the American people as some sort of an end-all, be-all solution to that debacle known as Obamacare? Well, it's because it doesn't carry through with the promises that the Republican Party has made. Stop and think about it. Where in the Constitution, where within the confines of the supreme law of these United States of America will you find a constitutionally guaranteed right to health care? Article non, section existent, clause 0. In other words, it ain't there. You are not going to find that within the confines of the supreme law of the land. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is just an inescapable and, dare I say, self-evident truth. Yet if you looked at the upper echelons of the Republican Party, and particularly with respect to these pro-Trump super PACs that are getting ready to launch a dragnet set of negative ads against these holdouts, against this drivel that is being called the replacement of Obamacare and the repeal of Obamacare, you would not be wrong in thinking that they aren't advocating for or adhering to the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this our beloved representative republic. This nonsense. It is this chicanery that has alienated huge swaths of the American electorate and has led them astray from the American system of polity. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. The question is, why is it that the upper echelons of the Republican Party have managed to convince themselves that this is something that the American people will tolerate, that this is something that we will not pay attention to? It speaks volumes about the intellectual disingenuousness that just runs rampant through the rank and file of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP. They thumb their noses at their base and their core constituency because, again, they believe they have us trapped. This Me Too party of socialism, which just disagrees with the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftist controlled Democrat Party on the pace at which we accept statism and totalitarianism, is unacceptable. It goes against everything that we have ever stood for as a nation and people. And it spits in the face of the memory of those sagacious founding fathers of ours who risked everything to give us the longest standing, constitutionally endowed, federalist representative republic throughout the entire course of human events. Now, as we have oft times reiterated on previous episodes here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, has Trump done some good things? Yes. Trump has done some good things, and we've applauded them. We give credit where credit is due. But I'm unable to back away from the fact that essentially what Trump is doing with respect to healthcare is continuing down a line of thought that is shared more closely with the Democrat Party than with the Republican Party. And I am just rather shocked that some within the rank and file of the so-called right-wing punditry and commensurate are not even wanting to discuss this. We know that Mark Levin made an appearance on Sean Hannity's program the other evening to discuss this debacle and this ongoing theater of political kabuki theater, or staging of political kabuki theater at its worst, known as the American Health Care Act. He lambasted it. But Hannity just wanted to keep kind of ignoring it. It's kind of interesting to see that Hannity and Ann Coulter have essentially come to blows over this over the course of the past couple of weeks as well. Folks, what we see right now unfurling before our eyes as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, is the fissures of division continuing to grip the hearts, souls, and minds of Republican thinkers and of the base of the party as well. We are a house divided. And I believe that that is working to our great detriment each and every time that it comes to the surface here. Healthcare is one of those most intimate, private attributes of the facets of our daily lives. It constitutes 1/6 of the nation's gross domestic product, or GDP. Why on God's green earth would anyone in their right mind want to cede control of that over to the government? We know that the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are going to erroneously proclaim that we have a right to health care, or they will attempt to erroneously attach that to the inalienable right to life. Now, folks, I know that we have oftentimes used the language and the term of inalienable rights. But what does inalienable mean? Exactly that it cannot be alienated from you. It cannot be taken from you, nor can it be waived by you. That is why you cannot voluntarily waive your right to life. It goes to the very foundation of how this nation was developed and how our system of polity works and the way that we interact with one another and with the rest of the world. It is part of the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of not only our shared United States Constitution, but indeed our very federalist, representative, Republican form of government. And the more that we continue to distance and divorce ourselves from this truth, this inescapable truth, the more difficult it is going to be for us in our capacity as United States citizens to overcome the various multitude of hurdles, obstacles, and adversities that have been erected in our path, particularly in this fast paced modern society in which we live today. In fact, that's what the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs, in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the 1950s and 60s, attempted to warn us about. The frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists would employ things such as the tactic of Cloward and Piven, of overwhelming the system, taking some little snag that the federal government instigated in the first place and overwhelming everything so that the American people would crawl to the government on bended knee looking for a solution to a problem that government created in the first place. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is something that we can ill afford to allow to come to fruition. That is the way that these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and the historical revisionists and Common Core standard bearers of education who infest our ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border seek to operate. That is how they seek to bamboozle us. That is how they seek to strip and deprive us of the reality that exists in front of us so that they can thereby replace this republic that we have with some sort of frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist dystopia torn straight from the pages of an Orwellian nightmare. That is what we are facing. That is the danger that stands before us, and healthcare is being one of the fundamental pillars that they are utilizing in the hopes of accomplishing this, in the hopes of forcing us to bow down and acquiesce to their dark and twisted machinations, which truly have no place in an open, honest, but above all, free society like that of these United States of America. Now, I certainly wish that that wasn't the case. I wish that they hadn't been as successful as they have. But when we examine this under the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity, I fail to see what other rational conclusion that sane, logical, rational thinking human beings can reach when examining this. We know that Mitch the Turtle McConnell and Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, the so-called leadership of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, are not, serious about doing away with federal involvement with one of the most intimate facets of our daily lives. They like the power. They like the control. They like the ability that they have to manipulate us. And so they're not going to move to completely dismantle the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. That's why the so-called American Health Care Act really doesn't change anything. In fact, in many ways, it is worse than Obamacare itself. And why is it that President Trump is going along with this when he had campaigned on repealing and replacing? Well, it's because they're wanting to rewrite what repeal and replace means. Remember that one of the things and one of the warnings that we have always given here, dating back to our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015, ladies and gentlemen, is that these nefarious forces who are hell-bent on stripping and depriving and abridging and encroaching upon your fundamental and inalienable God-given rights is that they play this dark and twisted game of semantics, changing the meanings of traditionally accepted words so that they can go forth uninhibited in their attempts to drastically, fundamentally, and dare I say irreparably transform these United States of America away from being the constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic that we know and love and have cherished for generation after successive generation. And folks, part of the reason that we bring this to your attention, that we harp on this, particularly with respect to healthcare, is because your rights hang in the balance. There is no way around that. That should be open and obvious to anyone who is observing this under the totality of the circumstances and in an objective fashion. The gutless opposition party has become the Me Too party of socialism. But even worse than that, they have become the deceitful party, the intellectual, disingenuous party that is also trying to push for the incremental embracement of this out-of-control leviathan of an administrative state which was ultimately created by Republican President Theodore Roosevelt. In other words, the man who is hailed as the father of the American progressive movement. And remember, healthcare was one of his targets too. These are the people who cannot leave well enough alone. These are the people who attempt to intermeddle with the facets of our daily lives because they think they know best. Yet is that how our founding fathers viewed this situation? No. Our founding fathers would have viewed this type of redistributive scheme as a complete and total travesty. It would be an outrage. They would neither tolerate nor would they accept it. But here we are today, ignoring the immutable natural law tenets that have formed the bedrock foundation of our Constitution and our Republic for well over 200 years. And why? Well, because it doesn't have heart. Remember that was one of the things that Trump came out and stated. That we don't have enough heart in the healthcare bill. I don't want the healthcare bill to have heart. I want the government to return to its properly prescribed position by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Then and only then can we truly begin to embark upon the journey of restoring this nation back unto prosperity. But the fissures of division and this inability to engage in civil discourse, these heavy-handed tactics that are coming from on high within the gutless opposition party are preventing that. We have turned our backs onto the time-honored values, traditions, and institutions that have propelled this nation to such lofty heights throughout her relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth, and unfortunately it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. Again, I wish this wasn't the case, but why are we about emotionalism? Remember that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and even our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, and certainly yours truly, on multiple occasions on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have stated that we must avoid allowing ourselves to devolve into a position of raw emotionalism or histrionics or hysteria, because that allows us to be easily manipulated, easily bamboozled, and easily led astray by these charlatans who are truly acting upon ulterior motives. President Trump, if you really want to win me over on this issue, don't talk about heart. Don't talk about compassion. Don't talk about this nonsensical drivel. Talk about the law. Talk about, look, I'm not going to accept anything that is violative of the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. That is the oath of office that I swore to uphold. That is the oath of office that I intend to live by and to abide by and adhere to. If you do that, you'll get major kudos from me. But if you continue with this drivel of, well, this healthcare bill just doesn't have enough heart. This healthcare bill, we got to take care of everybody. We got to pay for everybody, and that means socialized medicine. If you keep doing that, you're going to lose not just me, but huge swaths of the Republican Party. And yet, the midterm elections of 2018 are looming just around the corner, and I believe that Texas Senator Ted Cruz was absolutely right when he sat there and said that a surefire way for the gutless opposition party, or GOP, to shoot itself in the foot would be to fail to deliver upon the cornucopia of campaign promises that they have made throughout the course of the past 4 successive election cycles. Remember that the former governor, the state of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, said once that the Republican Party is the party of stupid. This is a perfect example of where that is the case. This is a glaring example of where the Republican Party has completely lost touch with its base. We don't want the federal government involved in one of the most intimate facets of our daily lives. That is completely contradictory to the foundational image that our founding fathers had devised for this nation at its inception some 237 plus years ago. But unfortunately, there are too few within the so-called right-wing punditry and commensurate who wish to discuss this. There are too many within the rank and file of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, that just want to make excuses. They're the ones that keep going forth and sing henny penny, the sky is falling, and it's always the Democrats' fault. Self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem, thereby delivering unto us self-determination. That is what has propelled this nation to such lofty heights. That is the sheer embodiment of what the supreme law of the land, which again, pursuant to the Supremacy Clause found in Article 6, Clause 2 of our shared United States Constitution, states is none other than our shared United States Constitution. The United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men, or at least it used to be. That used to be what the gutless opposition party, or GOP, stood for, but now we stand for eating our own? For representing the will of their constituents? What in the hell is going on here? It is a hostile takeover of what is the traditional conservative movement in these United States of America. It is something that cannot be ignored, yet it is something that is being ignored. And it is something that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I, and our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, have all tried to warn you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, about throughout the course of the past approximate 2 years. That there was this attempt to fundamentally, drastically, and dare I say irreparably transform what the conservative movement is about, to push this nation in incessant yet incremental fashion ever further to the left without a consideration as to the true hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people of these United States of America. Again, this is just one of those inescapable truths that we cannot avoid. Yet, here we are. We see that there has been this effort to create a consolidated, centralized push to use heavy-handed tactics to force people to bow down and acquiesce to some sort of frothing at the mouth, Fabian socialist leftist dystopia. Why? Again, the two mainstay political parties in these United States of America have essentially become the flip side of the same titular political coin. And it is the American people, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, who are held, or who are left holding the bag each and every time. And that is unacceptable. That is untenable, it is unsustainable, and it has no place within the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. But how is it that we wound up here? Well, it's because of the feckless leadership of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, the so called Republicans in name only, or rhinos. They disenfranchised and alienated huge swaths of the core constituency of the Republican Party, and they acted with arrogant hubris, and they acted with a haughty determination to attempt to strip and deprive us of all that we had by a litany of incessant lies. And those lies have weakened the position of the Republican Party for generation after successive generation and for election cycle after successive election cycle. You know, folks, when you stop and think about it, the Republican Party has had more than 8 years to come up with a plan for this. And in fact, back in 2015, they put forth a bill which would have completely dismantled Obamacare. But they did it because they knew at that time that Barack Hussein Obama was still the president of these United States of America. And they knew he would assuredly veto the bill. And now that the proverbial ball is in their political court and they control a majority within both houses of Congress and the presidency of the United States, they still flounder. They still fail to achieve the objectives here. And again, it tells me that they were never seriously committed to it. That this cornucopia of promises that they've made time and again were nothing more than ways to bamboozle the base of their party. They think they have us between a rock and a hard place in which they can control our destiny, in which they can dictate the way that the Republican Party will move into the future. And so they can spit at us, they can stomp on us, they can degrade us in whatever way possible, because we will continue to buy into that erroneous notion of voting for the lesser of two evils in election cycle after successive election cycle, and this is the end result. Chicanery. You know, ladies and gentlemen, there really is no more apt way to describe this other than as sheer, unadulterated chicanery. This is intellectual disingenuousness at its worst, and it's political kabuki theater at its worst. And yet I've also seen people come forth and say, looky, looky, you see, this is actually a great thing for Ted Cruz and for Donald Trump, this political infighting. It allows Cruz to come off as being magnanimous and strong when it comes to his re-election bid for the junior Texas Senate seat in the midterm elections of 2018, and it allows Trump to look as though he is standing firm on his principles. I don't see it that way. I see it as a travesty for the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people of these United States of America. I see it as a way to double down upon this out-of-control leviathan of an administrative state that has been working in staunch opposition to the true hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the American people for over a century and a half now. Ladies and gentlemen, the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists truly do believe that they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that means that their victory is within grasp. This is what they're working for. This is what they truly hope to achieve. And they see no reason to back down from it now, not when the Republican Party is essentially pushing Obamacare 2.0. They're sitting back in their chairs, laughing and yucking it up as we come across as some of the biggest fools and jackasses, sorry to be crass, ladies and gentlemen, to waltz across the American political stage, particularly within living memory. Why is it that we, those of us who want to go back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the supreme law of the land, in other words, our shared United States Constitution, are betrayed by those who are supposedly within our own political party time and again. Read my lips, no new taxes. John McCain, the Maverick, Mittens Romneykins, and now Donald J. Trump. And even George W. Bush. He wasn't a conservative. What has happened? Well, the Republican Party has been controlled by the detente wing, the live and let live progressive wing of the party, essentially since Theodore Roosevelt. Now, during the presidency of the last true dyed-in-the-wool constitutional compositionist, Calvin Coolidge, some 90 years ago, we had a true constitutionalist there. And that was when the Republican Party amassed that major majority control because of the great plethora of opportunities that were afforded to the American people, because we actually had a government that was operating within its boundaries as mandated by the Constitution itself, or in other words, by the supreme law of the land itself. Then we got Hoover. A progressive businessman outsider, the last president until this current president, who claimed that he wasn't going to draw an income from holding the highest office in the land, who, like the current president, wanted stimulus spending programs that contributed to the Wall Street crash of 1929. Folks, it's not about heart. It's not about compassion. It's not about the lack thereof. What this is about is the supreme law of the land and the seeming unwillingness on the part of the upper echelons of our federal government to strictly adhere to the language that is there, black and white, in iron gold ink, set down on parchment, delivering us the longest standing constitutional document in the entire course of human events. Why do we ignore this? Why do we continue to believe that this kind of infighting that has been hampering us for far too long now is going to do anything for our benefit? You know, folks, the clinical definition of insanity is engaging in a repeated course of conduct, expecting a different resultant outcome. Well, that's what the Republican Party has become. That is what we are seeing come to fruition in the land of the free and the home of the brave, and it is disgusting and it is unacceptable, because it is exposing us to something that we simply can ill afford to accept. It is something that works against the hopes and dreams and future aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. But unless and until we are ready, willing, and able to admit that this is a problem, that it is something that stands in our way, then we are never going to be able to fully achieve the noble and laudable goal of restoring American prosperity in these United States of America. I'm sorry, there's just no way around this inescapable and self-evident truth. And unfortunately, again, it shows no signs of improving, at least within the foreseeable future. And the political kabuki theater and the bread and circuses are going to continue unhampered, unimpeded. And it's going to be we, the people, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, who are left holding the bag on this one. Now, is that the legacy that we want to hand down to the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born? I know that that's certainly not the legacy that I want to hand down. when the Supreme Court basically handed down that disastrous series of opinions in which Obamacare became, quote unquote, the law of the land, the late Antonin Scalia made a good point. He said that it's now SCOTUS care, and it is unlikely to disappear. Why? Because when you start dangling these types of political red meat things, these types of entitlement programs, it is nigh impossible to get rid of it because it becomes a political lightning rod. That is the unfortunate reality. As a nation and people, as I sit here, speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members. I certainly wish that that wasn't the case. I certainly wish that we were in a position where the Republican Party was actually doing what they vowed to do in election cycle after successive election cycle, but they are not. Therefore, it falls upon our shoulders, in our capacity as United States citizens, to stand up for what is right, to be vigilant, to be diligent, to be proactive, to take the stance that is necessary and proper for the embetterment of not only ourselves, but our fellow popular sovereigns. Because unless and until we are ready, willing, and able to take the steps that are necessary to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, as is called for in the preamble to our Constitution, this sort of chicanery will continue non-stop. You know, this is the sort of thing that one would expect the so-called right-wing punditry and commensurate to be discussing, particularly with regard to a bill that amounts to nothing more than the continuation of Obamacare. Now, yes, there are a few, Mark Levin being that notable exception. But where are the bigwigs? We know that Sean Hannity, during his interview with Mark Levin, attempted to poo-poo this, attempted to make it as though his quaffsaya wasn't doing anything wrong. Look, it's got to be challenged. And again, as we have stated on repeated occasions, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyers, simply do not want the president to fail. Because that means that we would be cheering for the downfall of the nation at large, but it behooves us to demand that we strictly adhere to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, because again, as the old adage goes, the United States is a nation of laws and not of men. But you wouldn't know that looking at the current trajectory of this gutless opposition party or GOP-controlled federal government. It hasn't changed. That's part of the reason why Jason Chaffetz is leaving. The transparency that was promised is not there, and the chicanery is not being retracted. If anything, it is being expanded in exponential fashion, and again at the great detriment of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States of America, we the people. It's difficult to admit that. We don't like to admit that because it means that there is a major problem that exists within the two mainstay political parties. It's far easier to believe that we can just keep going down the status quo. Continue to vote for the lesser of two evils because that will somehow place this nation back onto the... But how is that working? We have a president that is pushing to run negative ads against conservatives who stood against this. We have a president who, during the debate with the House Freedom Caucus, which ultimately caved to his will, who said that he would primary the holdouts against the so-called American Health Care Act. Folks, these and strategies of the Democrats. But what it tells me above all else is that the Republican Party, by and large, doesn't give a rat's posterior about the hopes and dreams and future aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. That they are going to continue to double down on these efforts, that they are going to continue to try and redefine what conservatism is. And remember, that is something that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I, and even our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, have attempted to warn you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, about throughout the course of the past approximate 2 years. And if you want proof positive of this, because we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have always said we don't expect you to take the things we say at face value, I have an interesting clip that I would like to share with you from the supposed king of conservative talk radio, Rush Limbaugh himself, because I think it would be beneficial for us to hear it and then to discuss this in greater depth and detail, because when you stop and think about it, it really is important. It really is something that has to be considered, because he's the one that used to be the truth detector. He's the one that used to be about telling everyone what it is that we were missing. And so I'm going to go ahead and cue this soundbite up, and we'll discuss it in greater detail. So here we go, right now.
Carl in Leonia Valley, California. I'm glad you waited. It's great to have you on the EIB network. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Rush. Thank you so much for sharing your mic with a rank amateur.
Appreciate that. That's a nice compliment.
Listen, thanks to the advent of the podcast and the iPod, I've listened to you for probably 7 years now, and I listen to every word. There's no interruptions. I can always back you up. I just love this thing strapped to my belt buckle, and I can play your whole show. But I don't recall anybody calling in and well, I guess what I'm thinking is so many people refer to you as being on the right, way right, or extreme right. And I've given that thought, and I know the left is almost all the rest of the media. I don't know anybody that's on the right. I wouldn't know where to begin. To me, you're the guy in the middle.
No, I have to tell you something here, Carl. I haven't said this a lot, but over the course of the many years of this program, I have on occasion said that the truth of the matter is that this program is actually, and the people who listen to it, is actually the mainstream of America. We are attempted. They try to marginalize you and me by categorizing us as the so-called extreme right or the far right or right wing, which is done to denigrate anybody who's not liberal. They always target them. The new one is alt-right. And the alt-right is everything a conservative is, plus he's a white supremacist. And so that's the
cute that he tries to say this, but we know that the alt-right is actually a group that is following, frothing at the mouth, Fabian socialist leftist mentalities. And again, that's part of what they are attempting to do. They are attempting to redefine conservatism. I would agree with Rush that what he used to claim to stand for, what he used to claim to represent, were certainly the attributes that apply to the mainstream of America. Absolutely. That is what the American people have traditionally been about. But this all right thing to try and extend the defense to that goes beyond the pale. But anyway, I want to go back into this just a little bit further. And I think it's one of those important things that we have to get to. So let me go ahead and cue that back up, and then we will discuss it further still.
Steve Bannon and the Breitbart people, those are alt-right conservatives. And of course, that's BS as well. The left makes up these labels. They assign people falsely to these labels. But this is actually a very shrewd observation of yours. I'm not denying, I'm conservative, but you realize there are many, Carl, in the so-called conservative movement who think now that I have sold out and betrayed conservatism because I did not help to try to destroy Trump during the primaries.
Oh, no.
The measure of a real conservative, according to them, is somebody who...
Wait a minute. That's not entirely accurate there, Rushy. The reason that people are coming out there and saying that you have sold out the conservative movement is that you didn't equally call into question the negatives of Trump as, say, you would with John the Mushroom Kasich, who, by the way, his father was a mailman, in case you didn't know. The way that you sit there and apologize for positions that are clearly not conservative, that is shilling. It's shilling. The way that you attempted to sit there and say that the so-called infrastructure stimulus spending package of $1 trillion that is allegedly going to be accomplished or brought into fruition over the course of the next decade, and saying that that's just like what FDR did, and that's fine because it'll herald in this great Republican dominance of the American system of polity, that is shilling. That is partially selling out. That is part of the problem that we're facing. But again, that isn't the way you're presenting it there, Rush. It isn't. And I believe that what's going on there is intellectually disingenuous. This is why the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, feels confident that they can continue to peddle untruths and that they can continue to thumb their noses at true, dyed-in-the-wool, principled, constitutional compositionists. It's because of excuses like this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that we cannot afford to allow to come to fruition. This is something that we cannot just bow down and acquiesce to because, again, it goes against our best interests and it lends credence and credibility to those who are self-avowed Leninists like Steve Bannon. My goal, and the goal that we all have here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, going right back to our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015, and yes, that date was chosen specifically for the purpose of speaking to the unity that exists, the greater good that exists, is I want us to get back to the Constitution. Jeremy wants us to get back to the Constitution. Nelson wants us to get back to the Constitution. And by God, if we got back to the Constitution, then a lot of these great plethora of problems and issues that we are facing, both as a nation and people, would begin to fall by the wayside. Look, when we look at the opening lines of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, does it open with the lines of "we the politicians" or "we the agents of government"? Or does it start with "we the people"? How can you be part of the mainstream of these United States of America when you disregard the fundamental truth that defines us as a nation and people? That is something that Rush is missing in entirety. That is why people are so frustrated with him, myself included. But let's go ahead and get back to what Rush was saying there, because I believe that this is very illuminating to a great many of the things that we have been encountering in the wake of the 2016 election cycle. So I'm going to go ahead and cue that back up. So here we go.
Who would have seen that Trump poses the greatest threat to conservatism ever, and a real conservative would have joined the effort to take him out. Since I didn't, I am now viewed as a...
Well, maybe they need to do like you and start writing some history books, because I think when you look at it from a viewpoint of what are we going to see 20, 30 years from now when we look back at Obama and some of these nutcases,
a difficult one to answer there, Carl. Let me answer it for you. 20, 30 years with regard to Barack Hussein Obama, we're going to see another chapter in the progressive history of the United States, where the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have once again ushered in a guy based on raw emotionalism and raw sensationalism. And with respect to a history book, I've written one. I've written two. Let us not forget that the father of the so-called American progressive movement, Theodore Roosevelt, was a Republican. Let us not forget that Republican Dwight David Eisenhower gave us the most liberal activist Chief Justice ever in the history of American jurisprudence, that of Earl Warren. Let us not forget that the Republican Party is just as capable of spreading socialism as the Democrat Party. And let us not forget that the father of this nation, George Washington, in his 1796 farewell address, cautioned the American people not to allow themselves to break down into disparate and competing factions, because we would lose sight of the overarching image that has guided this nation since our founding. That is a major problem. And that is what we have to address. I think that when we consider that under the totality of the circumstances, with a modicum of objectivity, we see what this is about. We see how this harms us. And the division that exists within the center of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, that is what has been leading us astray. That is what has been harming us. And again, I do not believe that this is something we can escape. Ladies and gentlemen, this is part of the problem. This is why, now more than ever, that it is absolutely imperative for us in our capacity as United States citizens to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because that is how we pick up the crucible and begin to restore American prosperity. That is the one and only way to do it. That's not what Rush was saying. Rush was continuing the division. The division that is entering center stage now with this healthcare debate. We have to look at it from a constitutional lens. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions, I invite you to leave them either in the comment section here on our YouTube page, or on our Google Plus page, or even on our Facebook page. And on top of all of that, we invite you to follow us over there on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, as well as the Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. You will find the Blogspot account that is just chock full of information. And just as you will find in the description of today's Solo Flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, you will find a link to the Cafe Press account. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at the Cafe Press account, we have all sorts of trinkets, goodies, novelty items, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer logo, or our first class passenger logo, or even the two uplifting America logos. Folks, this is on hats, shirts, shoes, neckties, watches, clocks, apparel of all kinds, even pet apparel, drinking glasses, shot glasses, mugs, thermoses, license plate covers, stickers, you name it, it's there, and all at reasonable prices. With all of that, and at reasonable prices, you simply cannot go wrong with the Cafe Press account. Folks, go ahead and take a gander at that and give us a little bit of support so that we can continue to provide you with this indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment that we do provide you with each and every time we take you over the friendly airwaves. We really do appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. We hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.